All right, I'm going to start. Hi, everybody. We're going to start in just 1 minute. Mikel and Gerard are here.
Hello, everybody.
Give everybody a minute to get logged in.
Thank you for joining us.
And sit here and watch the numbers go up. I love that.
Yeah.
Quiet. My dog. You've got a chat already? Who's chatting?
Busy already.
Oh, Laura Lynn. Hi, Laura Lynn. Good evening.
You do have lots of fans.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome back. This is the third in our Painters on Painters series. And the timing is great because with the wrapping of the Arc de Triomphe and the mechanics of it are fascinating. If you have a chance to try and watch that time-lapse video, it's amazing. And I'm also looking forward to hearing about Mikel's experience on the Gates crew. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. I'm more likely to see them there if you have a question. And I'll also monitor the chat. And well, Gerard and Mikel, it's all yours.
All right.
All right. So should I start? Yes. Welcome to this great presentation, because we're going to give you a great presentation. First, let me talk about New Wave Production. This is my non-profit organization, and we're working obviously with Maplewood Library to bring you the best. It's a 501c with bringing and with there like for the art and film education. So this is what we're doing today, and with Mikel, we're going to talk to you about Christo, who is really, in the news today because of the Arc de Triomphe, like Joanne was saying. So let's continue and let's talk with the rest.
Okay, so just to give you a kind of breakdown of how this is going to go, we're going to talk about his early life and work first, and then get into some of the history that was happening, some of the things that were happening. Gerard kind of knows about what was happening in Paris in those days and what was happening in the European theater. So Gerard's going to go through that. We're going to talk about some of Christo's influences, and then we'll get into the selected projects that he's done. And there are many that he and Jeanne-Claude have done. And then I'm going to talk about the Gates. So that's basically how the hour is going to run. So let's get into the early work and life of Christo. He was born in Bulgaria, as many of you know. It was a communist country, and he wanted to get out of there. So he fled, went to various places. Here's his short bio. Wait, I just got to get rid of this stuff on my screen. There we go. So he was born in June 13th, 1935. And the funny thing is, and we'll talk about this a little further, but not too long, he and Jeanne-Claude were born on the same exact day, the same exact hour. So a match made in somewhere. He was born Christo Vladimirov Yavichev, and in the town of Gabravo, Bulgaria. He leaves communist Bulgaria in 1956 and goes to Prague. He sometimes says he's actually from Prague rather than Bulgaria, because he ended up there at a very young age. And he discovers the work of Picasso and Miro in Prague. And Gerard will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. In 57, the Hungarian Revolution breaks out, and he bribes a railroad employee and flees to Vienna, Austria. And then soon after that, he goes to Geneva, Switzerland, where he ends up washing cars and dishes to support himself. But he's also going to art school. He's going to an academy at a very young age, 5 or 6. His mother gave him private tutoring lessons as an artist and supported that. So he's a genuine deal. A lot of people say, oh, he can't draw, he can't paint, he's not an artist, but he really is. So in 58, he goes to Paris and begins painting portraits of wealthy society ladies. And this is how he and Jeanne-Claude meet. Her mother asked Christo to do a portrait of her. and also of her daughter. And then that began the love affair partnership that would last over 50 years. He actually stole Jeanne-Claude away from a guy who she had just married like a year or so earlier. So it was an interesting kind of confluence of things. His early work, known as the original wrapper, as it were, was made of, wrapping cans with material and rope and then shellacking them. He did a toy horse, as Christo packaging a toy horse. He put through a package in a wheelbarrow. So these are things that he was doing in his early days that were, sculptural, 61, 62. And then when he was in Paris, he and Jeanne-Claude pulled together this incredible feat without permission, by the way, and put these barrels, stacked these barrels in an alleyway, closed it off to traffic and everything. And it was their first large-scale site-specific installation, 1962, and it referenced the Berlin Wall, which was erected, in the year before, 61. So you'll see a kind of thread of freedom that runs through Christo's work, because obviously he fled the communists and he wanted to be a free person, and he ended up, coming to New York and doing whatever he wanted to do. So the the picture you see on the lower right is actually his first wrapped little, it was a dockside piece, and it was part of a show that he was in 62, and he didn't want to show in the gallery because it was traditional and it was propaganda, and he didn't want to be in the gallery, so he moved outside of the gallery and did this piece on the dockside. And the picture above it, as you can read, is the wrapped public building, the first proposal that he had for the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, which was in 62, 63. So you can see that his projects take a long time to formulate. Gerard?
And very, very different than what he came to, So this is really more like, we will talk about like Dubuffet and all the people of the time. It's more like a brute, like a raw way of wrapping. When you see the wrapping today, obviously, it looks like a beautiful fashion dress all put together. There, it's like more raw. So in 1962, Christo is starting to come up as an artist on the wrapping, and the wrapping is going to take some different time and a different style, something a little bit more manicure. But the base, the beginning of this, it's this. And we'll talk, when we talk about Dubuffet and the new realism, we understand a little bit better where all this come from.
So as I said, they were both born on the same date, June 13th, 1935. And they spent their life together making these large-scale, site-specific environmental installations, which were always ephemeral. They never lasted very long. How they met was, her mom was interested in getting portraits done of the family. And this is a painting by Christo of her mother, of Jeanne-Claude's mother. And then, of course, Jeanne-Claude is at a younger age in 1962 in Paris, where they spent about, I guess, 6 or 7 years together before they moved to New York City. And if you asked Jeanne-Claude why, they moved to the United States, she would say, we didn't move to the United States, we moved to New York City. And that was her thing. Here you see Christo in Paris in 1962, 63. And the portrait that he had done of Jeanne-Claude on the right, he ended up wrapping, which was appropriate for him to do. But he's a young guy here. He's not sure what he wants to do yet. But when they get to New York, things start to take off. And this is Jeanne-Claude and Christo in his New York studio. On the right, you see they're checking out some material that they can use for one of their projects. And they begin to work on things in New York City in a big way. Christo, shows his influences. A lot of people, again, think that he wasn't a true artist and didn't have that kind of history. But in actuality, he did. And Gerard's going to take it from here for a little while and talk about his influences.
I want to add something of what Michael say. Paris was all the time the city of artists from the beginning of the century with the surrealists, and in the 60s, He went to the US, obviously, after the war. We know the abstract expressionist, and he came back to the 60s. 60s was really something extraordinary for all artists, and especially for this new movement. But before that, that's very interesting, because we look at these people, we look at Picasso, and obviously they are the founding father, and Miro, they were the founding father. But in the 60s, when he grew up, obviously a big influence on him, they are the one who breaks the rule. Picasso breaks the rule when he does Guernica. All the Miro work are the surrealist work who's gonna break the rule. But in the 60s, these people are still starting, and they are still establishment. Meaning, when I interview people who were like in the 60s, time in Paris, they say, we did not talk about Picasso and Miro or anyone else. We talk about what was going further. Even so, they are the base of everything. They are the father of it, and it's still extremely important. But at that age, when you are like in your 20s, what you want to go forward, and you want to break what the rules are. So even so, these are the very important painters, they are the establishment, nothing like what's going to come. And now, when I show you really what's going to come after, and what his life in Paris is going to be, it's where we're going to see how he's going to get into the group, into the idea of making something new.
And just a reminder for everyone who is interested in Picasso, we are doing a live webinar Picasso talk on December 16th. So in a few months, tune in again. We'll let you know. We'll send out all the information and the links and stuff, registration.
And one thing too, I want to add about Picasso. Picasso is a very complex artist. He has a lot of different things. So we'll spend certainly more time on all this period. But really to talk about Christo, the father of conceptual art, we have absolutely no question, is Marcel Duchamp. And Marcel Duchamp, even today, we talk about him, because Marcel Duchamp is the first one who is going to take an object, put it in a museum, and say, this is art. Because it's where we're starting. The idea of Christo wrapping something is to take an object or a monument and or maybe wrap it up. But it is what there is outside with art. And Marcel Duchamp is the father of the conceptual art. He will give, he'll open the door to a lot of these conceptual artists that we're going to talk in a minute, and especially Fluxus and all these things. So when we talk about, a concept artist is somebody who just exposes an idea. Ephemeral, there is no object. Marcel Duchamp, of course, took something from outside, he put it in a museum, but the object by itself is not what's important. The idea is important. And this is where we break away from the traditional art with a painting. Anti-art, revolutionary, anti-society, and making a big statement about art is not a piece, it's a way of being. And then we go into Fluxus. Fluxus was like the most revolutionary movement of the 60s, where people will go on the street. And here I'm going to translate it for you, because it's really a French movement. One of the most important is like Ben. Ben is really the most important of this person who used to say, Ben, he used to say, I am art, c'est moi là, or regardez-moi, cela suffit. It means, look at me, it's enough. So art is destroyed as a conventional way of doing it, and art, it's what life is. Marcel Duchamp used to say, art is life, life is art. It's not something that you make, it's who you are, what's going on. And the ephemeral idea of this is what it is. This is not something we stay, it goes.
I can read that French on the left there. Fluxus, c'est la vie.
Right. So it's like, any kind of art form, it's life. Life is not a piece of painting put in a museum at that time. Very, very anti-establishment. And I want to add too, very fast, that at that time in Paris, we have the Algerian War, we have the French New Wave, we have all these elements to break the rule. So Christo, even today, looking at the Arc de Triomphe, putting this, was a revolutionary way of doing art, and it's an anti-art way of looking at it, because there is no pieces of things that you hold on it.
And it's interesting that I found this picture in the middle of this guy tied up, kind of wrapped actually, as part of the Fluxus movement, and doing a violin concerto on the street. So that's if you can't read what he's doing there, he's got a violin and he's kind of plucking it.
Right. very theatrical too, you know. And right after this, at the same time than Fluxus, you have the new realists, les nouveaux réalistes, who are really certainly the most influence on Christo, because he will do some work with them. So César is one of them. He is very well known to taking cars, you know, and crush them, going to a place where they crush car and make sculpture out of it. So César, you know, we call him César. We don't even speak about his last name because he's known like this. He is one of the most important new realists, nouveau réaliste, because he takes an object, who is like an object of any kind, and makes it an art piece. Same as Marcel Duchamp. And César will do too, will take a piece of any kind, it reminds me certainly like even the pop art, you know, the pre-pop art, you know, a piece like the tomb, and he makes a sculpture out of it. Everything can be a sculpture, but it's raw, and it's an entire process. Always the new realists say, we don't want this old thing. Even they really were against all the abstract expressionists. They wanted something who came from life and were conceptually based. So very important guys in that time. When you go to Paris at that time, it's César, it's Armand, it's Dubuffet, it's Klein, it's Nikit Saint-Phal, it's all these people that we're talking about.
And later, those of you who know, who are art aficionados and history buffs, John Chamberlain would do exactly the same thing that César was doing by crushing cars and making sculptures with it.
Yeah. And if you see even like, you know, what Andy Warhol did, what pop art came, he came from there too, you know. So if we restart and reconnect the art history, we see this. Here there is like three of the most essential, you know, artists of the time, you know. Nikit Saint-Phal, that not too many people knows, but if you go to Paris, she made a very big sculpture in front of Beaubourg, who is still there. It's again like the idea of taking a shape and changing it, but she's still like kind of a traditional. She is a part of the new realist, and she will be married or had a long relationship with John Tingley, who is another person of the new realism. So the new realism is composed of all different people, but she's one of them. Yves Klein is one of them, and really the father of the new realists that we did not talk, we don't have to talk about everything, is Pierre Restany, where they did write a little bit like the manifest of the surrealism. They write a manifest who are saying new realism, it is to explore new vision. And between these two people who are from the new realists, at the middle you have Jean Dubuffet. Jean Dubuffet, as a French painter, was certainly the most expensive painter sold in the US. When I talk about like the gallery who sold him, he used to come in the US and sell very, very well. Jean Dubuffet is not a new realist. Jean Dubuffet is called art brut. So he takes something and he makes it as kind of a naive and kind of raw. He used to be very interesting. He used to be like a wine salesman, and he becomes one of the most important painter of the time. So when you see this, see what Christo is going to come after, and he was a part of them because he did some work with them too.
And also that piece on the above the Jean Dubuffet is also a Jean Dubuffet piece that I think Christo probably saw. And when you see the wrapped coast later, the one that he did in Australia, you'll see the similarities of what Dubuffet was doing and what Christo ended up doing. Also, Yves Klein and Christo were very good friends, and Klein was one of the first conceptual artists, and this is his famous photograph that is a montage by Jean Kendar and Harry Schunk, and they were also photographers for Christo and Jeanne-Claude. So it all goes around and comes around.
And Klein is very well known for this kind of really absolutely entire joke to take collector in the Pont Neuf and say, you know, this piece of sky here, I sell you this piece of sky. Art is not sold because there is nothing at that time. Actually, Klein did a lot of this blue painting. He did the painting with body of the woman and everything else. But the idea of like art is not something as an object that we can collect. It's much more a fact of life. This is really, you know, the start and the continuation of this. I want to just reconnect this with the Buddhist philosophy. Klein was very interesting to martial art. He went to Japan. All these things are reconnect somewhere. And even when you talk about Duchamp, they were always interesting to the Zen and Buddhist philosophy, where, you know, it's ephemeral It's like we are here for a certain time, we're going to disappear. The pieces, what's left, it's not so important than our life, or the impact of our life is going to be. So very, very important people.
The martial art that Yves Klein practiced was judo, and he was a black belt, and he was very into it. He probably wouldn't have been able to pull this off, this jump off the roof, if it hadn't been for his practice in judo. Because what happened here is he jumps off the roof, and there are 6 or 7 guys down on the ground holding a tarp that he's going to jump into, and they've been taken out of the photograph, and it's been montaged into a street scene. And the other idea here is that, you know, life is going on, even though he's doing this really crazy thing, jumping off the side of a building, but this guy down here on the right is still, you know, cruising on his bicycle. Actually, I think that was one of the photographers.
Right. And one thing too, we can say that even so that he was kind of wealthy, was well established. You know, I know he came from a very good family. He died very young at 34 years old of a heart attack. We don't know exactly what there is on the back of it, but he had
a heart condition. It was his 3rd heart attack.
Yeah, so it's
he had a
like,
heart condition from somewhere.
To know what, you know, but anyway, you know, he died very young, and he had a big career in front of him, because the Nouveau Realists are still like one of the main movement, what everyone talks about it today. When we talk about, you know, any kind of modern artist, they talk about Yves Klein as the father of conceptual art.
Gerard briefly mentioned the nude paintings. He painted nude women and then had them roll on the floor or go up against the wall and make paintings. But also these same nude women in his apartment, and it was all documented, were wrapped by Christo.
Yeah, and he played too with like fire extinguisher. There was a lot of experimentation. What is they call the Nouveau Realists? They wanted to explore, you know. And this is very important. So here we are, and now we're going to the other part. Michael is going to talk about the installation of other artists, you know, who are very kind of close to what Christo is doing.
So what happened in the 70s, the early 70s, is that installation art, land art, earthworks, site-specific art, and public art, not to mention what Christo and Jeanne-Claude did, which was environmental art, came into fashion. These artists were going in on this big time. On the left is a group called Ant Farm, and they put together this. This is a very famous piece in Amarillo, Texas, in 1974. It's called Cadillac Ranch. It's 10 Cadillacs, you know, sunk into the ground. And if you look closely, you see those cans on the ground. That isn't litter. Those are actually spray paint cans that were supplied to people who came to visit and used to make all of that graffiti on the Cadillacs. The piece on the right, also a very, very famous piece by Robert Smithson, the Great Salt Lake in Utah, called Spiral Jetty. And what he did was he put together 6,000 tons of black basalt rocks and made this jetty come out into the lake there, 1,500 feet. Really incredible piece and very influential in the 70s. Two more I just wanted to mention. Walter Dimaria, who is big with the Dia Foundation. If anyone is familiar with the Dia family and their foundation, really, really huge. There's a place in Beacon, New York, that's really incredible that they fund. So this is the lightning field, and the idea here, of course, is that these steel poles are sticking up out of the ground. There's 400 of them, and they attract lightning when there's a lightning storm. And there's some really incredible photographs of lightning hitting these steel rods that are in the ground that I didn't want to show, because this is, I think, a lot more, you know, you can see a lot more. When the lightning was hitting, it was dark. So Andy Goldsworthy is more or less a contemporary artist. And he does these very ephemeral pieces. In fact, the video that I got this still from, in like 2 seconds, this whole thing's going to fall apart and fall to the ground, much to his dismay. But that happened to him a lot. You know, the wind would blow, all of a sudden a gust would come up and it would just get blown away and he would start over. I found a quote that he gave, which was, I thought, interesting, and I wanted to share that with you. And he says, there's 2 different ways of looking at the world. You can walk on the path, or you can walk through the hedge. And I think that's the beauty of art. It just makes you step aside off the normal way of walking or looking, and you can see the And that's what these guys were about. They were looking at things differently. They weren't into, gallery shows and stuff. They were into doing something outside and creating, relating to nature, creating a kind of backdrop or an involvement with nature, and really getting into things that were not considered art at the time.
Okay, let me add something there too. It's very interesting. The idea of nature in art is the opposite what museums do, So art and nature means that art is a part of life. Because it's a part of life, everything go together. And again, I want to just bring it back to the Buddhist philosophy and the Zen philosophy, that the times that everything is done, it's what the power of life is about. So all this is an anti-art, idea, or an anti-establishment, I would say. So
yeah. And so we wanted to go through some projects that Christo did with Jeanne-Claude, and every project that he did from now on is with Jeanne-Claude. And she was very instrumental, especially with negotiating, with the bureaucratic system involved. So this is the wrapped Reichstag that he did a really beautiful drawing of here, I think. Yeah. And I wanted to just go through a couple of quotes that I thought were important to share. Jeanne-Claude says, all of our work is about joy and beauty. So when they're asked, what is the work about? What's it about? What's the meaning of all this? We have always wished to create something beautiful, and we spend all of our money, all of our time, and all of our energy doing that. And then Christos says, to do work of art, to do work that in his broken English, to do work of art, basically they exist because they are totally irrational. They're useless. The use of the project is only for beauty. So it's all about aesthetics with these guys. It's all about the beauty of the work, the transient nature of the work. It comes and it goes, and bam,
I still think that there is a way, even if they don't say it. I see it like there is still a political statement on the back, even if they don't say it. I think that there is the anti-establishment is very, very strong on that.
Well, that's one man's opinion.
Yeah.
So why is it so ephemeral is another question.
Yes,
and I found this quote by Jeanne-Claude. Jeanne-Claude would always have an answer for all of these difficult questions that come up. And I think this is great. The temporary quality of the projects is an aesthetic decision. Our works are temporary in order to endow the works of art with a feeling of urgency to be seen and the love and tenderness brought by the fact that they will not last. Those feelings are usually reserved for other temporary things, such as childhood. Childhood does not last. We have to, really relish it and enjoy it. And of course, our own lives are limited. Like Gerard was saying, everything's temporary, the Buddhist way of life. So these are valued because we know that they will not last, which gives them just that much more value. And we want to offer this feeling of love and tenderness to our works as an added value dimension and as an additional aesthetic quality.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add too, is like, I don't know if you ever saw the Tibetan monk doing the mandala with sand. They spend weeks and weeks to do something, and when it's done, they blow on it. It has a philosophical process, this, the ephemerality. It's like, going back to who are we as living people. We make a statement, we try to do the best we can, and we go. So I think that is very important. It's very, very important, Yeah. As a painting is not. A painting is an object you put somewhere and it's there and it keeps values and it stays there forever. So it's a very anti-classical establishment of art, So.
And Christo says that about the difference between painting and his work, or painting and things that are temporary. So here we have the wrapped Kunsthal in Bern, Switzerland. 67, 68 that Jeanne-Claude and Christo did, realized actually happened after not a lot of negotiation, actually. They got this thing done pretty quickly and it was approved. It's 26,156 square feet of recycled reinforced polyethylene fabric. And it's just, it's a museum. And so it was in conjunction with their 50th anniversary back in 68. And the interesting thing that I find here in this particular photograph, a couple of interesting things to point out. One is that there's a Volkswagen Beetle in the lower right, which is one of Christo's pieces. He wrapped a Volkswagen Beetle. I don't have a slide of it, but take my word for it, he did it. And then the other interesting thing is the Calder on the left in front of the museum, you can still see.
Oh,
And they had to really, so that people could get into the museum still, they had to make a slit in the front for access. So it was, but look at this and compare it to the Reichstag in your mind, and how the forms in the Reichstag are much more seen. You can like see through what the building is, more so with the Reichstag than with the Kunsthalle.
and it's one thing was too is very like interesting. It's a museum, I mean, there is this idea of like taking a museum where we have classical art in it, where people are going to spend hours looking at it, where it is millions of dollars, and wrap it up like a little bit like if you were doing like an object or some kind of value just with a museum. So they work as making this as a work of art. It's very interesting if you see on the back of everything. Let's remember that Duchamp did the same thing, by putting a ready-made inside.
And the powers that be always bring up the insurance issue, but in this case they did not for some reason. And what happened was the insurance company came to them and said, you can't have this thing. This is a fire hazard. You got to get rid of it. So it was only up for a week, as opposed to what, their pieces are usually up for 2 or 3 weeks. So I was listening to a talk by Christo, and he mentioned Balzac and the sculpture, the famous sculpture by Rodin that you see here. And, so this idea of classical drapery that artists really went in on. The piece on the right is a drawing by Albrecht Dürer from 1509. So Christo comes from a tradition of wrapping. If you look at it that way, what Rodin did here, just quickly, is he actually did a nude portrait of the figure of Balzac first, and it had a large belly, and it was not very aesthetic. So what he did was he took Balzac's coat and made it into a drapery, and then bronzed it out and made it look like this from the clay. So fabric, like clothing or skin, is fragile. It translates the unique quality of impermanence, another ephemeral kind of idea.
Sure, but it's interesting that it's Balzac. Balzac was like the most strong people in this life instant, a drinker, or running away, full of debts like he can be. So it's interesting to, the analysis we can go when you dig in it. It doesn't mean that it's what Christo wanted, but art open door, even if they're not open by the artist who is doing it. He can reflect on you to produce something. And when you say Balzac, that I know the picture of Balzac, the sculpture, and I say, oh, wow, Balzac. Even so he was famous, he was such a living life fully too. So you can look at this and just push it a little bit on looking at the analysis of Christo.
Well, and also the combination between, the literary and the art making. Literature being a form of art, but, visual art takes it to a different level. And, it also shows you that Christo is really involved and really kind of steeped in this tradition of old master works.
What's interesting about Christo is like he had always, he was very good in business. They raised money very well. They make very good sculptures. They had all this kind of like a good life in a lot of ways because they could accomplish everything. Often an artist is a struggling person, especially with money. So it's a kind of an interesting fact too,
So you can see here, great example. This is the piece I was talking about when I mentioned Dubuffet. Great example of the immensity of his draping, of his wrapping, and this is just an incredible piece. I wish I had seen this, but it's in Sydney, Australia, or it was in Sydney, Australia, in 68, 69. It's 1 million square feet of erosion-controlled fabric that the farmers use on their, on the same kind of fabric the farmers use on their, to cover their plants and stuff and their vegetables. It's a 1.5 mile long by 85 feet high. And you can see that these figures, how small these figures are in comparison. and 35 miles of rope to hold the whole thing down.
Yes, the
Pretty
dimension is like unbelievable. It's on a scale that it's not human. You know, I mean, as you look at it, you know, we like you say, you know, you can see it's not human. It's really a scale was unbelievable, and they had, you know, and you will talk about the gates. All this structural team of people were very down to earth and very practical. Often, as we know, artists are not like this. Architects maybe might be, but most of the artists are like dreamers. And this is not a dream.
Well, and they went back.
Build this.
They went back to this site after it was, you know, over a few years later. And Jeanne-Claude said to Christo, "We must have been crazy."
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty crazy thing, but they find all the elements to do it. So they have the drive, they have the want, and they have the business ability to find, you know, everything, all the elements that they need to do it. Look at this.
Yeah. And here's the Wrap Reichstag. As I was pointing out, this is the one I was talking about. See how the contours of the building are still sort of there. So he wrapped it pretty tight in this case. And wanted to keep the original feeling of the architecture of this wrap building.
Yeah, a little bit like the Arc de Triomphe too. You know, you will see in the Arc de Triomphe too, you can't recognize the building in the tight. At the beginning in 1962, when we saw the first one, was really more wrapping, a wide wrapper. So interesting. There is a progress.
The credit here on the bottom left, if you can see it, is Wolfgang Volz, who I'm going to talk a little bit about later with the Gates project. But he's an amazing photographer, and he is like their, you know, main man for much of the photography that was done from the 70s on, you know, and he's still working on these things. He's an incredible photographer. And look at this picture. It's just really, really beautiful.
Oh, what a beautiful work too, you know, as an aesthetic, like you say, you know, it's a gorgeous piece, you know, I mean, really, I can't imagine what it takes for the people being on the rope, hanging up and trying to see exactly how this, imagine just folding a piece of paper or a piece of material. Look at what it is. So
also look at the dates 71 to 95. I mean, they tried, they really wanted to do this, and they kept trying until, you know, finally someone said, okay, let's do it. And similar story with the Gates, which I'll tell you about later. This is a little piece of video that I wanted to show you because, you know, Christo's actually talking here, and it's kind of a nice thing to see. I hope the audio is okay.
It does go. This is okay. We can hear.
Okay. Hundred thousand meters.
It's amazing. It's like a dimension one. Like it's not human. It's like extraordinary.
It's flat surface with a sculpture. The surface is elaborated by the artist. He can go around, experience that different surface of the sculpture. All that space is entirely designed by the artist. Now, what myself and Jeanne-Claude do, we borrow that space and create gentle disturbance for a few days. Of course, many people try to stop us.
Yeah. Disturbance. Gentle disturbance is very important.
Everything in the world belongs to somebody. They know 1 square meter in the world do not belong to somebody. Of course, the drawings, preparatory study of the Reichstag is about the Reichstag. 14 days in June, July 1995 was the Reichstag route. We have the biggest amount of visitors, 5 million people in 2 weeks. And that participatory public is unique. Actually, people create the energy in anticipation. It's impossible to orchestrate or invent it. Everything what is inherent to that space to become part of the work of art.
There's Wolfgang on the right.
We love to do this project that way because it's the real expedition and the incredible energy of human relation in space. All these projects, they're absolutely, totally irrational. The world can live without them. They exist, only me and Jean-Claude like to have them. And this is no justification, no reason to exist or make the people think they should exist. Because that cannot be bought. Nobody can charge tickets. Nobody can own them. Nobody can use them. All that is the power of this project. They are absolutely expression of artistic freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is very typical. The Klein, they've Klein, all these conceptual artists, you know, you do not buy an object, you cannot own an object. This is here, human beings are coming and it goes. And that is really what the power of this kind of art is.
And moving on to the Valley Curtain, which was in Rifle, Colorado, 1970, 1972. When I was in art school, I saw this film, and if you get a chance, it's on YouTube, you can look it up. It's a pretty interesting documentary of how they put this thing together, this incredible feat of engineering. 142,000 square feet of nylon fabric and 110,000 pounds of steel cable. He had an incredible crew working with him on this, and they installed it. And the photo on the left shows you how after they installed it, it got ripped to pieces, which he doesn't like to talk about much because you know, he doesn't like to talk about the failures that happened. He likes to talk about the successes. But in the end, the photo on the right is a really great photograph of how the Valley Curtain looked in the landscape. And look at how it kind of mimics that background of the mountains and stuff. And in the film, they show these guys golfing. And there's one green that these guys are on golfing, and they see in the distance, and they start talking about the project, and it's kind of funny, kind of interesting what they say. But he had it, you know, presence of mind enough to be, and the money to be able to, after it got destroyed by these 60-mile-an-hour winds, to go ahead and redo it and get it done. And it's really, really incredible piece. Oh, by the way, I'll let you say something in a sec. The fabric here is the same exact fabric and the same exact color as what he used on the gates.
Okay. You know, you have to think to colors have a lot of things to do with his work too. There is a, you know, like a perfection of aesthetic. And when you see the color, you know, if you put the color in nature like this, it could be a painting. It could be a painting. If you see it from there, you know, the balance of aesthetic and the shape and the balance of the frame. If we take a frame like this, it could be. So let's, you know, as you see this, we can think about the concept because it's the most important, but we can see about the aesthetical beauty and the color. And that is a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, having the sun coming through this with this blue and this kind of reddish. It's really make a very, very powerful piece.
Yeah, and it only stayed up for, you know, a couple of days because the wind destroyed this again. You know, came up and knocked it over, ripped it apart. So the surrounded islands over down in Biscayne Bay in 83. I was also a student at Pratt at the time, getting my master's degree, and I got a phone call from my cousin who lived in Florida at the time, and he said, "You got to come down here. You got to see this. It's incredible." And he actually bought my plane ticket to get down there. And I went down there for the weekend. I felt like a jet setter or something. So 11 of these islands were surrounded by this fabric. And he also managed to take away 60 tons of garbage as part of this project. So they weren't really unhappy with him for this. The environmentalists objected and they didn't want him to do it, but he got permission and it all came together. I flew over it in a helicopter. And at the time I had a Super 8 camera that just, you know, I couldn't hold still, but it was the only way I could manage not to throw up in this helicopter was to keep that camera, that viewfinder in, you know, in my field of vision and have it recording. But on the right, you see how he has a, you know, mock-up drawing of it. And some people say that this was more of a artistic idea of Jeanne-Claude because it has that female quality about it. But, you know, that's up for debate.
Yeah, we don't know how they have been debating for this to come, but they come to a conclusion and they work great together. We know how difficult sometimes it is to work together because me and Michael we work together.
Are you kidding?
You know, so we know what we can get into some argument, but it's unbelievable in a piece like this, taking like all their lifetime to really being tuned in being okay about the aesthetic, about the concept. It's kind of exceptional.
Yeah. And they really loved each other and had a very special relationship. And even though they argued a lot and they were both very stubborn, they managed to put these things together in such a beautiful way. So the Pont Neuf, Gerard, why don't you talk about this, since it's one of the most famous bridges?
Well, I remember the Pont Neuf. I never I was like in and out of Paris at the time, but Le Pont Neuf is, let's talk about what is the element or the monument. Of course, when we talk about Arc de Triomphe is like one of the most important things, but Le Pont Neuf is too. If we talk in Paris about all the bridges, we have mainly, I think about 10 or 12 bridges in Paris going across the Seine, but this is a key. So he has a symbol of love. Pont Neuf has a symbol of like love, of caring. Few films was shot on the Pont Neuf. So he has a very strong image. And as you can see, again, what I really want to put the finger on is like what they started with, what wrapping was, and how they are going so tight around the Pont Neuf that you recognize the Pont Neuf. And it's more like a beautiful dress. It's more like an aesthetic than a very wide wrapping of art brut, because people like Dubuffet and also the team of the people around them in the 60s were doing things of wrapping, but it was more like like we saw at the beginning. And now it's really refined, it's very well balanced, and he has a sense of aesthetic like a beautiful dress. But again, it's a symbol in Paris. So they don't take anything, they take something who are very specific. And I think it's kind of extraordinary that he finished with the Arc de Triomphe. The Arc de Triomphe is like what's built for the army of Napoleon. It's like victory, it's a sense of pride in France and everything else. So having done this is a great accomplishment.
And so, one more comment is that this particular bridge in France has been around a long time. Gerard, you know how many years?
Oh, I don't know, but it's one of the oldest ones, since the beginning.
Like 600 years. I mean, it's really, and it's been a subject, like Gerard was saying, of all kinds of painters have painted it many times, filmmakers, writers have written about it, and what I think Christo and Jeanne-Claude are doing here is they're changing the idea of subject. So the Pont Neuf was the subject of all these things for many years, and they're turning it into an object. And that's a very important concept.
So I think it's like the nouveau realist, the new realist, like Klein and Nikita, all these people was looking at. They were looking, okay, this is art, this is an object. How do we change the vision? And in their declaration, they say that the nouveau realist will change the vision of how we see, object or art, and that's what they're trying to do. It's the same kind of work.
And this running fence was a real tour de force in trying to get this project done, because it went through so many different farmlands owned by so many different people, and like Christo said in that short video, everybody owns something. So he had to go into the living rooms and kitchens of these people and deal with these people who objected strenuously to this kind of thing, as you'll see in the little video clip that I have. But you see the stats on this really incredible piece that went for 24.5 miles, just incredible work of just love, and they just put everything into this. But let's look at this thing for a second. It's pretty funny. So this is how people felt, and this is just an example of some of the objection that he got, not only for this piece but for everything that he did.
All a bunch of garbage.
Wait a minute, what's about
That's art? Some lousy curtain coming through here with a bunch of city slickers looking at it? The hell with it. I'm against it. I think it's stupid.
This guy spending $2 million, $2.5 million in a Kanye Sonoma, and he's not thinking anything out. He's put money in here.
That don't matter. What kind of art is that? What art is that? Hanging a piece of rag up for 50 miles. I can hang a rag up. I bet he can't even paint a picture. He's an idiot.
It isn't art. A curtain 10 feet long and 18 feet high is not art. And it's not art if it's 24 miles long.
So that's the kind of stuff that they had to deal with. And, and Christo took it all in stride.
Yeah.
They just kept moving on, kept trying to get permissions, and they did like 37 projects, and they only got like 20 of them approved, or 22 of them approved. So gives you an idea of their success rate. Here are the umbrellas in Japan. This is one of the, I think, only pieces that they did where they did the same kind of piece in two different countries at the same time. And in Japan, there were 1,340 blue umbrellas. And you see that he had to put them in water as well as on land. And there were in the United States, 1,760 yellow umbrellas, each umbrella weighing 485 pounds. And, you know, another issue with this project was the wind. Once they pushed, you know, all those umbrellas up and sort of unfurled them. And but that picture on the right is just so amazing from the top of the hill, seeing how the landscape is, you know, kind of flecked with these yellow umbrellas. Beautiful piece.
Yeah. Beautiful color too, you know. Again, colors are really a big part of the work.
Very
You
important.
can see it, you know, in the here too, you know, colors are great, you know.
And this is the floating piers that were, it was the first piece after Jeanne-Claude died. She died in 2009. And this was a piece that they had, you know, worked on since 2014, but it didn't come to fruition until 16. And again, 1 million square feet of yellow fabric wrapped around 220,000 polyethylene cubes that were floating, holding it up. And then it went to the island, Sao Paulo out there. Millions of people came to this. They didn't expect this kind of crowd. And they ran into a little bit of a logistical nightmare with all of this weight on these people walking on water. Wasn't quite expected, but they managed to work it out. I think at some intervals they had to shut it down to, you know, fix things up and reinforce. But really interesting piece.
I think the most difficult part of this is to realize how much is put in and how suddenly it goes. The idea of going away, it's what I think people have difficult to deal with because they like this thing. It's so beautiful. It's so greatly done. He has been putting a lot of work and suddenly it goes. So many people want to hold on to it and will say, you know, why don't you leave it a little bit longer? Like this, we can take advantage of it. But if you take it longer, you become an art piece. You become an art like any kind of traditional art. So this part is, I think, the most difficult to accept, that it goes. Because if you do this, it means you have to think about your own self, you know. And I think it's this is really what the strong statement here, you know, the idea of it not staying, it disappear.
And then the gates. The reason I'm in this getup with my Gates hat and my vest is because this is what I had to wear when we did the Gates project in Central Park. The Gates project in Central Park, 1979 and 2005. It took many, many years and many administrations to get this thing approved. In 79, Ed Koch was the mayor, and it was refused. Dinkins refused it. Giuliani refused it, of course. And then Michael Bloomberg came along, got elected in 2002, picked up the phone and said, Christo, let's do this thing. Now, the thing that I found out in my research, of course, is that Michael Bloomberg was a pretty big collector of Christo's works. Yeah. And so having this, it was a little bit self-fulfilling, but having this project was also for the benefit of New York. New York City, the estimates that Bloomberg got together from his administration and his staff was around 80 million, that it would bring $80 million to New York City in terms of people going to restaurants and hotel rooms and everything. And it ended up being bringing in $254 million. Wow. A pretty incredible number. And Bloomberg, of course, was very happy. And so were Christo and Jeanne-Claude. And here you see the first unfurled gate of all of the gates, the 7,503 gates that were in Central Park. Christo had Michael Bloomberg come out and do the unfurling for this gate. And you can see the cardboard tube is what the actual fabric was wrapped around up in the cocoon in the top here. So the cocoon at the top had this fabric all wrapped up around this cardboard tube, which was fairly heavy. And what you did was you had this long painter's pole with a hook, and there was a little thing that you got a hold of, and then you ripped that Velcro piece off, and the gate came dropping down. So Bloomberg was very instrumental in this project, and just very, very lucky that he became mayor for Christo and Jeanne-Claude. Lucky for them. Yeah. So here are a couple of photographs that I pulled out. The one in the snow, I think, is really beautiful because the gates, even though it was up for only like 16 days, there were sunny days, there were warm sunny days, there were rainy days, there were snowy days, and there were very, very cold days. It was in February, so it was freezing cold. And here's a great picture of my buddy Wolfgang, who was on the scene, of course, and took these pictures. And what Wolfgang also did was he would take pictures of things that were, like he would take the landscape, and then Christo would take that landscape photograph and use kind of montage collage and then drawing on top of it to make it as accurate as he possibly could. So here's Christo in the middle, on the bottom there in his studio, working on that drawing. Other important, mention, I think, is Vince Davenport, who was one of Christo's chief engineers and for the Gates project, very instrumental on how to construct these things. This is a tool, a bolt that I kind of pocketed in my travels. And, since I'm doing this, I just thought I'd bring it out of the closet. The thing here is a little advertisement for the film that was done on the Gates by Albert Maysles and Antonio Ferreira. And this little structure here, this photograph here, you see the base down here, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Then we had to bolt these aluminum holders, these brackets, to the bases, and then lift up this vinyl, which was about 16 feet high, vinyl tube that went on was plastic tubing. And then there was a cover that went over this aluminum base here, so you couldn't see it. And I'll show that to you in a minute. But it was pretty involved on how it was constructed. A lot of engineering went into this, and these bases were laid down before the crews got there to install. People were like, what are these bases? What are these things doing? It was all these questions about, from people in the park, had no idea what was going on.
And the safety too of it, they have to think about everything. It's like to build a building, if by any chance one of these gates were falling on someone, imagine what liability does it take. So
they were
certainly very strong, their organization. They're a very, very good organization.
Yeah. So here's Albert Maysles on the left and Antonio Ferrara on the right. Albert's brother died many years before, but they had worked together on some really great films and gotten awards over the years from different organizations.
Well, they are the documentarian of New York City for absolutely
for many
both
things.
of them, for many things. Since the beginning, they are really the first documentarian of like the city of New York, like going to high schools. There is many films that they have been making.
They did Grey Gardens.
Maysles
did Grey Gardens. It's a well-known film.
Yeah.
So my crew building the gates. This is actually my crew. These are my friends. And Joanne in the middle here has those plastic things on her arms that cover the aluminum connections that I was telling you about. And Linda was not Linda. What was her name? I forget. But you can see how how we had to lift up on the slide on the right. We had to lift these huge gates that had the cocoon on them already, and they weren't light. So it took 3 or 4 people to lift them at the same time, and it was like 1, 2, 3 go. Really kind of involved. At one point, we had to shift the bases, and you can see the bases. And this, by the way, is the walkway behind the museum, behind the American wing that goes up to the Central Park. So behind us would be the glass wall of the American wing. But these bases sometimes had to be shifted a little bit in order to make them work. And we had these big steel crowbars. And I was shifting one of these bases, and I slipped and it hit me in the head. So the day that they took this photograph, I was off recuperating. It wasn't a serious injury, but I wasn't there for this photograph, unfortunately. So this is the video that I made for the gates, when the gates were up. It starts out with the unfurling and then continues to, it actually starts out with me walking through the gates before they're unfurled, and then going to the boathouse, which is where we all met in the morning for breakfast. And then some shots from in the boathouse that I thought were kind of cool of Christo and Jeanne-Claude signing the backs of these things, of these vests. And then you'll see Christo yelling, you'll see Jeanne-Claude yelling to everybody. And then I shift to the unfurling, which is what it was on this day, February 12th, 2005. So stand by. See if this works.
It's gonna work.
Okay. So it's February 12th, 2005, and I'm here, walking to the boathouse, and on the way I'm shooting what I can and talking about what the gates are really made of. It's 7 a.m. So I lived in New Jersey, so I had to get up at like 4 and, shower and get ready to go and take off by 6 to get there on time. And so we went to the boathouse for breakfast, and at about 8:30 this day, this is the unfurling day, we got, the crews went to their, respective places and had, this is all done already. So the gates were all up at this point and ready to be unfurled. Outside the boathouse this day in the morning were all these media outlets that were waiting for this to happen. And they were all on their way to the press conference, which was going to happen in the Temple of Dinder at the Metropolitan Museum. And here you see the 16-foot tall gate and the cocoon at the top. And that's Albert. Here's the boathouse.
They're now signing the backs of people's vests. The crowd signing Christo and Jeanne-Claude signing the backs of the vests.
Is there in this room someone whose uniform has not been hand-signed by us? But get here.
Get here!
Christo gets a little pissed. And I don't know if you noticed, but he was mouthing the words as she was saying them. That's how close they are. So this is my crew on the transverse, the northern part of the Metropolitan Museum, unfurling our first gate. And we had 100 gates that went from Fifth Avenue around the museum down past the American wing. And that is me with the painter's extension, pulling the fabric off the gate and dropping the pole drops down, the big pole of cardboard. That's Joanne doing her thing. And our captain of our crew there, making sure people aren't, that's my daughter, Nora. She was a little girl then. She's older now. And this is a view of the gates from inside the museum, inside the American wing.
Beautiful.
A view of our gates that we built, that I'm very proud of, as you can imagine. And here's a little drive through the park from the Gates Mobile. I was with my parents in the bus. They had buses going around the park all day after the gates were installed. And you see joggers. There's still people enjoying the park, even though there were many people who complained to us as we were building it and saying that, what are the birds going to do? Where are the birds going to go? The birds are going to get killed. And, people were just being, the horse and buggy still running through the park, really great. And the park was full. I mean, this was February and the park was really active, more full than I see it, sometimes during the summer.
Yeah.
I had seen it during the summer, right?
And I think it's very well absorbed by what Central Park is. So he looked like he fits very well when the project is done and you see all these gates.
Those are my parents. I'm interrupting. Those are my parents. They're the cameo.
Yeah.
And these are the gates behind the museum as we see them driving by that we built.
One thing too, I can really mention again, it's the color. The color are very specific color. They are the color of the sun, they are the color of the spirituality, the Tibetan monk and everything else. There's this color of like orangey and, certainly something to do with it because they had to pick that,
Yeah.
With the sun, it's absolutely beautiful.
And they had to space them so that they didn't get in the way of the trees. Yeah. And they did it in the wintertime so that the leaves wouldn't be, in the way of seeing them. And so it makes you realize and look at the landscape that's around it. It makes you more aware of it. You're right.
No, it's an absolutely beautiful installation, and it looks great. It looks really great. even if you had to leave it there, I think people would have.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody was
accepted,
saying, why can't you leave it longer? Why? They were all complaining about it coming down.
I just was talking today about like the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower was like such a scandal when it was made, and everybody wanted to get rid of it, and suddenly it becomes this symbol. So this could have been if they were staying there, but the idea of not having them staying is like the big part of their way of what they want to say. So.
Okay, so let's move on to the next. Okay, so present day is, of course, the Triomphe wrapped, which just happened on, I guess, last weekend, right? Last Saturday.
Last weekend, the 19th. Right?
It was on a Sunday morning. They did a feature on it. They did a feature on it in 60 Minutes, and it's just and it's I saw pictures of it. Millions of people are going to see this thing. It's really incredible.
Yeah, and just to tell you a bit about Arc de Triomphe, the Arc de Triomphe was built, at the time of Napoleon. Napoleon I. He was reinforced by Osman and everything else. It is a symbol of victory. It's where the army were going across or through to show the strength, the beauty, the great France. So he has a symbol. We're certainly one of the most patriotic symbols. Whenever there is some kind of very important holidays, they go under there, and under there is unknown soldiers, where they just, everything is like connected to this symbol. So it's a very, very strong symbol. So taking this and wrap it up, it's really a way of finish his life. It's a kind of a beautiful conclusion. So,
and it's also another example of, where something hundreds and hundreds of years old, like the Pont Neuf, is combined with a modern view and taken to another level, which is what he was all about. And this is just reminding you that he started this idea in 1962 with this photo montage of wrapping the Pont Neuf, the Arc de Triomphe, I'm sorry, Arc de Triomphe. Thank you, not Triumph,
yeah.
Triomphe. And, so that's why it's, from 1962 to 2021. And
another thing I can add about the architecture of Paris, this is lined up with the Arc de la Défense. Arc de la Défense is one of the new part of Paris, a little bit outside of Paris. So the one they lined up the Arc de Triomphe with a new thing. So it is a part of being included in the new Paris. So it's a pretty important thing. I don't think he could have done this on the Eiffel Tower, It's too high. But this is an absolutely great way of finishing. Of concluding your life,
And one thing that Christos said in this talk that I was listening to is that, it's kind of serendipitous that things are delayed until a certain time because everything has its time. And he said that they wouldn't be the same if they had done them, if they had gotten them approved earlier on. And that he was kind of, looking back on it, he was kind of happy and fortunate that they got approval when they did, and they were able to do what they did when they did.
And I like to the wrapping, like when you have the two Arc de Triomphe, one on the side of each other, you see the old one, the original one in 1962, with really wrapping, a wrapper, they wrap it up to something with like a much more sophisticated, So.
Yeah. So I that's the end of our presentation, but I wanted to leave time for questions if Joanne can come back and field the question.
We do have one. If you could talk a little bit about the how of the wrapping the buildings, the mechanics maybe, and how in the world did they do that? Yeah,
well, it's an engineering feat, and they really have a team of the best engineers they can find. What Christo did was he went to a lot of the universities, a lot of the engineer departments in the famous colleges and universities around the world, and he would tap into that that kind of wealth of information from them, and then he would hire a specialist engineer like Vince Davenport, to really be the leader and the engineer in charge of the project.
And I'm sure they use engineers the same thing that they use engineers to build buildings. These guys have a very strong knowledge of their skills, and they adapt their skills to something like this. So certainly they were interested by the work, but they are very, very well skilled because you have to know how to do this.
Well, for the Arc de Triomphe, they had professional rock climbers, and they after they had all the materials down. What Christos says is there's the software of the project, and then there's the hardware. The software obviously is everything before, all of the negotiations, all of the, figuring of how much material they need and what they're going to need and the kind of crew they're going to need. And then the hardware is, of course, putting it all together and building it.
One thing too
Rock
is really
climbers. Were there any helicopters involved with bringing things up?
The helicopters were usually involved in the post, in like after it's built to get the video and the photographs done.
I mean, certainly they had like cranes, they had all kind of things to just do that, but still it's a very big endeavor to be able to do this. But what I want to add too, something interesting. So like through his life, they have been doing this wrapping, and they are the only one who does this. So even so, the idea by itself, to wrap something can be coming from everywhere else, because they have been doing so consistently of their life. When we talk about wrapping, even people who have very little thing with art, they know the name Christo. Christo means wrapping, and Christo means like the Triomphe and the gates. So this reinforcement always of a very specific style gives them a name, and gives them a way of recognizing, the same way we recognize a Vermeer, a Rembrandt, a Jackson Pollock. So there is an identity into his work, and it's a beautiful way of finishing your life, that your name is going to be here forever as the person who wrapped monuments, So
yeah.
We do have another question. Did they use one big piece of fabric or smaller pieces?
They sewed a lot of the pieces together. Obviously they had different pieces of fabric to make the fabric, to put the fabric together. So there were I see the question, there were 7,503 gates. And those pieces of fabric were also sewn together in Germany, I believe. But yeah, no, they took smaller pieces, smaller lengths of the fabric that they used. The polypropylene is usually what they used, or some kind of nylon fabric, and they would have a team of sewing folks putting them together.
Oh, they must have like everybody specifically to do some specific job. The same thing you have people doing specifically on the cruise set or anywhere. So very extremely well organized. That's what I'm amazed. I'm amazed about two things: how the dimension of the job, and two, again, and I want to repeat that most of the artists do not have the skill to raise money. This is very, very well organized as a business, and I'm amazed. I mean, really amazed to see what the dimension and how much money is raised.
So it needs to be, first of all, I want to do a shout out to Joanne Fink, who just I saw sent a message in. Joanne and I were on that crew. Joanne worked with me at the museum for many years, and she's really a really close friend of mine. So shout out to Joanne. What the business end of the deal was that Christo would make these drawings, would make these mock-up drawings, and work very hard on them. And he had a clientele. He had collectors. He had museums. He had Christie's and all the auction houses waiting for these drawings and these mock-ups and these works that he would do, collages sometimes, and he'd sell them for anywhere from like $750,000 to millions of dollars.
Michael, do you know what happens to the fabric after the projects are done?
It all gets recycled. It all gets recycled one way or another. The steel, the 8,000 pounds of steel that he used for the gate spaces, all got melted down and reused somehow. The fabric that is used, it all gets reused either in another piece that he's doing, or it gets recycled into other things like fashion or whatever.
And are there any other unfinished Christo projects that he's hoping to do?
Well, there's the mastaba, which it was actually one of the pieces. The mastaba in Abu Dhabi is one of the pieces, one of the sculptures that's going to remain. It's not going to be torn down, and it's like the size of the pyramid in Giza. I mean, it's huge, and it's on water. So he did not think, Christo did not think, Christo had this idea that he would live forever. He ate a head of garlic every morning for breakfast. And one of the things that I never understood was why he smelled so bad all the time. He smelled like, I couldn't, get near him. He smelled like garlic all the time.
I'm sure it's not just for this, Michael. It must be something else,
No, well, he did it because he thought it was healthy. He thought it would make him healthy.
This is the old-fashioned way of thinking, maybe his grandmother from Bulgaria,
right.
I don't know.
probably came from that. But he did eat garlic, and he did not obviously think that the Triomphe, the Ark, would be his last project, and he didn't live to see it because of COVID. It got postponed. So there was one project that never got realized, which was so close to being realized, and that was called Over the River. And that was like the big talk when we were doing the gates, and Joanne will probably remember this. We were doing the gates. Everybody was talking about Over the River, because that was a piece of like 5 miles of fabric that was going to be hung over the Arkansas River in Colorado. And he got so close to making that real, to making that happen. But it actually got approval when Obama became president. And then it got a lot of things got in the way, especially the environmentalists, and they sued, and it became a really long and drawn out lawsuit. And he finally, when Trump was elected, just walked away from it and let it go.
Well, it's still a very great way of finishing his life. It's like such an established and
he's
a great statement.
Did a lot of stuff.
Very prolific. I mean, he was lucky too. When he died, people were like finishing and accomplishing and finishing his work, because most of the time it's not something easy to finish. So.
Any other questions?
Oh, well, there's one here. What did we name the covers for the hardware?
What did we name the covers for the hardware?
Yeah.
What did we? Didn't we name them hats? Weren't they? I forget what we named. Joanne, that's Joanne, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget. Ask her. I don't remember.
Okay.
Long time ago, Michael. So you can forget some of this thing.
Yeah, Elise. Yeah, she forgot too.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. But there's that one picture where she has like 10 of them on her arms, on her, like she was like a robot with these orange things on. We had a lot of fun. It was a great project.
It sounds like a great experience.
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic.
It's like a good memories, that's for sure. And a great way to have Michael being able to talk and being alive, and tell us about it. No, sure. I mean, it's very rare that we have, we have a witness to a work of art. It could be anything, or knew somebody who was a very famous artist. So that's
at one point I was able to bring my crew up to the roof of the Met so they could see what it looked like from high up, and it was kind of a disappointment because it didn't really look that great from up there. It looked better from down on the ground.
It was made to be walked through.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
what it is. Yeah, absolutely.
And there were no accidents. There were, Gerard mentioned, the insurance issue, and no accidents. Nothing ever fell over. Some of the gates got ripped up and vandalized, but we had monitors out there all the time with their tennis balls on the end of those long paint sticks because the wind would wrap them around the top of the gate, and they'd have to be unwrapped. And in order to unwrap them, you needed something soft like a tennis ball to, bring them around.
I'd be curious to know if it's who was the organizer in all this. Is Christo, who is Jeanne-Claude? I mean, there is one of them who certainly was super organized and super structured, because in a couple of people like this, there is certainly one of them who took the lead in the organization skills. I don't talk about the creativity. The organization skills are unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
It's like, for me, it's like this blew me away more than the creative aspect that I really love. But how did they do this? I'm looking at it and I say, I cannot believe it.
Well, that's where the strong part of the collaboration comes through, because Christo was a very charming guy. He was had a good sense of humor. He would crack jokes and he would say things, and everybody kind of wanted, Christo was the name. He was the artist, and Jeanne-Claude would be the first to say this. He was the artist, but she was his partner in that way. She was like the mouthpiece of the collaboration, and she would really have the right words to say, know the right people to talk to, present things to organizations, neighborhood communities in a way that was very loving. And she was just, full of, well, I remember we did a lecture with Jeanne-Claude and Christo, and before the gates, because we had an exhibition in the museum, which laid out all of the materials and stuff and talked about the gates and had a lot of his drawings in there. But we did a couple of lectures with them, and she insisted on having a microphone we put a lavalier on him and he would be at the lectern, but she insisted on having a microphone and she sat in the front row. And every once in a while he would say something and it would be a little bit off or not really understandable. And she'd chime in, and she'd say, oh no, well, what you mean really is this, this, and that. And she'd be like the person to keep him honest.
Certainly very, very strong lady, because really when we talk about Christo, most of it, Jeanne-Claude, obviously, I mean, when I grew up, it was Christo with Jeanne-Claude, but we realized that it's really a team of work who brings this to be alive and exist, so pretty amazing.
We have two questions to wrap up with. One is, since the Gates was done in February, was it timed to not interfere with bird migration? And the other question is about where the fabric was obtained. Was it specially made or?
Yeah, it was specially made in Germany, and they sewed it. They had this crew of what do they call them? What do they call sewers? Sewers? No, people who sewed. They had a crew, yeah, and they put them all together. There was a lot of objection from the seamstresses. Thank you, Karen. Seamstresses sewing things together in Germany. Karen Olin, by the way, also worked with me at the museum and was in charge of programs for education. She was great. So the question about the bird migration, I don't think it was time necessarily to coexist with the bird migration, although that was maybe a little bit of a plus. The bird migration happened earlier. It happens, in like early November, late October. And this was, or maybe even a little later than that. But the birds who stayed there, who don't migrate, people were concerned about, the environmentalists were concerned about, because, birds don't know what these things are and they're flying around and they're going to get caught up in maybe some of them and get hurt. And so there was a little bit of objection there, but I don't know that Christo and Jeanne-Claude actually took that into consideration in a big way.
Yeah, well, we will have to ask them if we could have asked them, So
Yeah,
they're not there. They're not there.
Yeah.
But I mean, they were very aware of their nature and whatever was going around. So maybe they had an idea of what was this about. It looked like they knew every details of any kind when they were doing something like this. It looks like, anyway.
Well, the one story that I like to tell also that gives you kind of a perspective on how they approached sponsors, because everybody wanted to get in on the act, with 250 million people coming to New York to see this thing. It was an incredible opportunity for businesses and people to jump on the wagon. So I remember the story about the Maybach, which was a car made by Chrysler, I believe, and they wanted to give them a car. Which they refused, of course, because they didn't take any sponsorship, because it could not, as Christo said, it could not be owned by anybody but them, and they didn't want to be compromised in any way. So what Chrysler did was it rented them the car. It gave them the car free to drive around the park, and so they had a chauffeur driving them around in this wonderful Maybach vehicle that was almost like a Rolls Royce. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, they were very strong in their belief that nothing will buy them. They want to stay free. It's for the people. It is. So they kept their way of thinking through the whole process. They never just changed. Often people change because they cannot do something. Somebody give them money. They can, no, they were very true to their way of doing things and very respectable. I respect this terribly, that when you can do something just for the good of what you're doing, and not seeing money stopping you. And what a will to accomplish this.
Oh yeah, they were.
What a drive, what a wanted to. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
It was like their babies. These projects were their children.
Yeah, it's not different like somebody building a monument or like something very, like great. It could be the Eiffel Tower or the Triomphe.
I see the question from Karen. The source of income was the sale of his drawings and his mock-ups and his all of his work that he would do as an artist, two-dimensional work that he would do, would sell for a lot of money.
lot.
Yeah.
So there was, like Michael was saying, there was a team certainly of people who were very interesting to his work and were helping the work to come by buying it. So he was, obviously it's not a sponsor, but it's like a way of like, we give you money to be able to put yourself there.
Yeah.
Because the drawing is not really the Christo, like it's a mark of the Christo, but the art by itself, it's not sales. There is no sale of art. So he certainly had very good, rich, or interested people in his art, or friends, or who were
collectors,
collectors, you know. And
Incredible.
it's like what you say, $700,000 or $800,000 certainly a drawing, or $1 million, big money.
Yeah.
Because you need big money to do that.
Well, the Gates was $21 million.
Yeah.
According to Christo and Jeanne-Claude. That's what it cost them. And we were paid volunteers. We were volunteers / paid. So because they called us paid volunteers because they paid us $7 an hour. And in 2005, $7 an hour was hardly, well, it was almost minimum wage, I guess.
Yeah, that was a good way to have a life experience doing.
But I would have done it for nothing.
Yeah, no, sure.
Honestly, it was the best collaborative effort I've ever been involved with. It was just so incredibly exciting.
Well, and you being an artist, Michael, it's even more, because this was like something that you look at it like, wow, what an experience. It's the same thing that if you ask me to be on the film crew with somebody famous, it's the same idea. The idea of like looking at it and say, wow, what can I learn from this, and how great it is. So
yeah, it was great. It was great. All right. So any other questions? Yeah, once in a lifetime. Definitely.
I think that's all. As always, I learned a lot. I'm sure that the audience did too. I'm looking forward to Picasso in December.
Yeah.
And thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Thank you to the library.
Thank you to the library. You know, it's really,
thank you to everybody involved in getting this on the air.
Yeah, and
for joining us, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
We'll see you in December.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Joanne.
Bye.
Bye.